The Batman is directed by Matt Reeves and stars Robert Pattinson, Zoe Kravitz, Colin Farrell, and among others. And in this story, it is another reboot of the Batman franchise, where Batman is now is only in his second year in the streets of Gotham, and he's looking for a killer that's essentially known as the Riddler. And it also has to do with him stuff uncovering a plot that involves with him trying to figure out what's happening with this woman named Selena Kyle, played by Zoe Kravitz. And there's also another plot involving that gets into happen with the mob that's run by Colin Farrell's Oswald Cobblepot, also known as the Penguin, along with John Turturro's Carmine Falcone. And so, as the movie goes along, you start to see that Batman has to essentially make a lot of decisions, that he has to essentially expose a lot of the stuff that surrounds Gotham and a lot of corruption that happens, and also solving the mystery involving with the Riddler, and among other things I won't go into too much detail on. Now, here's a little backstory. Now, I've been looking forward to this movie for a while now, in the last few years, because as you probably see from my channel, I've always been a Batman fan growing up, and I've always loved a lot of the incarnations of Batman. He's always been my favorite DC hero of all time. And when the movie was first announced, there were talks about when Ben Affleck was still on board, when he was still coming off of Batman vs Superman. He was attached to originally direct and star with the movie to do his own solo project. And I don't know how much of the story would have probably played out with his version, because I don't know if they were going to go with the full-on origin story with him, or if they were going to do more of a solo movie that was focusing on like a side story involving with Batman from the events of Batman vs Superman. And so the original idea I remember hearing about, well, I don't know if this was confirmed, but there were rumors supposedly that Affleck's idea was essentially to put a lot of it in the original Arkham series. To feature all of the original rogue galleries of Batman's foes. And I also did read something about him trying to essentially come in to use the villain of Deathstroke. And that was teased at the end of Justice League, and I was just really surprised that we never got that. Now, that's not to say that we never got it, because not sure if we're going to still probably be getting something with Deathstroke in the future with the Snyderverse. Because I've heard a lot of different things from going on with DC, and whether they're going to keep the Snyderverse canon and stuff with their own universe. And so if they ever do that follow-up with Justice League and everything, I do really want to see it and check it out. But as the years went by, as time went by, we started to notice that Ben Affleck was originally attached to direct the film, but then he ended up dropping out and was going to be just solely starring in the film. And then that's when Matt Reeves came on board. And then eventually, after a while, it got it to where we were getting that period where Ben Affleck was essentially leaving the role of Batman completely. And of course, there was a lot of this stuff going on where DC, Warner Brothers and everything wasn't really knowing what they were going to do with the movie at that point. And so after Matt Reeves came on board, they essentially decided to scrap everything that they wanted to do with the DC Extended Universe version with Ben Affleck's Batman, and decided to start from scratch and do a reboot. And one of the things that got me really interested, that actually piqued my interest the most, was the fact that we were getting an actual Batman movie where it was dealing with more of a detective story. Which, as far as my collection, we've never fully had a full-on thriller type of investigation type movie with Batman. There have been moments in the Batman films in the past where he's done detective work and things like that, especially in the Dark Knight trilogy, but never a full-on murder mystery kind of angle that we've ever seen him. And that's kind of fitting, because after all, I just found out within the last few years that DC Comics was actually known as Detective Comics. So that really makes me really anxious. That really made me even more curious to see how they would play it out with this one. And when news got around when Robert Pattinson was coming on board, I remember there was a lot of, much like with Ben Affleck's casting for Batman, there was a lot of, things going on that, a lot of people were outraged of his casting and everything, especially after the Twilight movies and everything. But over the years, I've come to really admire Robert Pattinson in a lot of films that he's done, including The Lighthouse, his supporting role he had in the Devil All the Time, and especially Good Time. I really enjoyed him in that. And so I think he's really grown himself to be a really quite amazing actor. And I was really excited for him to play Batman in this. And with them doing a more younger version and a different take that we haven't really seen much of before, I was very curious how they were going to play it out. And so after much delay with the movie, with it finally coming out, I can honestly say that This is probably the best Batman movie I've seen in years. It's probably the best one I've seen, at least as far as solo movies, of course, with Batman since probably The Dark Knight Rises. I don't really want to compare this one with the Nolan movies because they're on a really different type of aspect. But I would say this is definitely up there as one of the best Batman movies I've seen. And to get my pros out of the way, as I was not surprised that Robert Pattinson was very outstanding as Batman in this. I not only enjoyed his commanding presence when he's in the suit, especially when he's Batman. He has the suit itself reminds me a lot of the Arkham video games, and I like the way that the symbol of it can basically reflect bullets and stuff. And there's also some other things that his Batman does that I found very fascinating with how he's essentially trying to, use more of his detective skills. And what I liked, what I found interesting was that Pattinson spends more time being Batman in the movie than he does as Bruce Wayne. As Bruce Wayne, he's also great too. He's not quite the playboy billionaire that we quite know him from with the other films in mind, because this is still him trying to cope with, as you know, with his tragic backstory that you know from Batman. He's still coping with that after the last 2 years, and so with him pretty much going through that and everything. They do spend a lot of time mostly with him as Batman, but when he is as Bruce Wayne, he still is very, very stoic at times. He very has a lot of great depth to his character that I found fascinating. And there's also, as the movie goes along, we also get into some big twists that I found very fascinating with the way it plays out with his arc, especially toward the end. Now, to get the rest of the cast, I got to say we're phenomenal too, especially Zoe Kravitz. Now, I will always say that Michelle Pfeiffer was always my favorite Catwoman, but I do think Zoe Kravitz did a great job, and I really appreciate that they gave a lot of layers to her character with Selena Kyle in this, to where we get to see a lot of the twists and turns that happen with their character as it goes along, and a lot of the anti-hero and anti-villain aspect that we know from the comics and everything. And I thought that her and Pattinson were really fantastic together. And then, of course, what can I say about the villains? I'll get to Paul Dano, but I got to really give the big standouts for John Turturro as Carmine Falcone. I thought that I've always admired John Turturro as an actor, and I thought he was not only a great sleazeball in a lot of scenes, but he was also very menacing. There's even one part that I was really almost on the edge, just the way it played out. I won't go into detail, but he was pretty menacing as fuck when I was watching it. And then there's also Colin Farrell as the Penguin. I thought it threw me off because when I first saw the trailers, I didn't even know that was actually supposed to be Colin Farrell because it didn't look anything like him. And I thought he was outstanding in this. He's not in it quite a lot, but when he was on screen, I thought that not only was he very, he got the look of it right from the comics that I thought was great, but I also really appreciate that he was funny at times too, and a really good standout for it. And so I couldn't get enough of it every time he was on screen, and it makes me really curious where he's going to lead in the future with this character. Now, to get the biggest standout for me the most, I got to say, as far as villains, is Paul Dano as the Riddler. Now, I will always have Jim Carrey as the Riddler to go down in my heart as a very fun, performance in Batman Forever, given for what it is, and he was definitely the highlight that I really enjoyed with Batman Forever. But I got to say that Paul Dano basically did a really great, unique take with his Riddler, where he was not only creepy and menacing, but he was like a cross with the Zodiac Killer, which they were taking inspiration of, and he just had he has such an unhingedness to him that I couldn't really take my eyes off every time he was on screen, and that to me was a great way of showcasing what the Riddler can do in this, and the motivation they give him, the way it plays out with a lot of his killings and everything that he's doing, I thought was a pretty unique cause of what they were doing, and it kind of actually had an interesting social commentary to the film that really blended well with the rest of the movie, the way it played out. And then, of course, the other biggest pros I have to admit the most is I got to really hand it down to not only the cinematography that really puts Gotham in the gritty aspect to where it's, in this version, it's where you don't want to live at. It's a cesspool of a rundown city that, they never really displayed in the other films, where it's very drug ridden. They're also take a lot of influence mostly from Seven, because in this one it's very rainy. It has a lot of grittiness to it that almost feels like the most grounded that I've seen with the Batman movies. And that's no discredit from the Dark Knight trilogy, because I still thought those movies did it phenomenal as well. But I will say this one, they took it to another step where it's a lot more different than what we've seen with Gotham City on this level, where it's, in this one, they made it super, almost like a gritty, well, I don't want to say documentary, but you know, that kind of very so grounded to where you don't really want to be there. And I got to really appreciate the score in this. Now, I found it really fascinating how they were using Nirvana's Something in the Way in this movie, because they were able to essentially blend that music, that song plays twice in the film, and I appreciate that the instrumental vibe that it's going for in the score really plays out well with Batman's theme in this, and I really got really pumped every time it was on screen. And of course, you know, I really gotta give them a lot of props to doing the whole detective film noir aspect, where you get narration from Robert Pattinson's Batman or Bruce Wayne, that bookends the movie. And just the whole flow of it, where it's doing the whole investigation stuff, I thought makes really a good feature with Seven. And this was definitely a lot of the inspiration I see that they took from. And if this was a movie that was directed by David Fincher, I can see that all the influence is on it. And from what I also heard, originally back in the early 2000s, Darren Aronofsky was going to originally do Batman Year One. And I think they may have took some inspiration from his original plan for that film, because it seems like there were aspects in this film that I think I heard from that original script that they had in mind when he was going to originally direct that one. But I just couldn't get enough of this. Like, this is everything that I really wanted out of a Batman movie. And I really do want to see where this goes in the future with the way the story played out, all the different stuff that Batman has to go through in order just to essentially, you know, become a lot more of the hero that he becomes later down in the comics and stuff. I thought was fascinating, and I appreciate that they also weren't going to go with the whole origin story like we've already been, where he's already, because this one he's already as Batman. And so, given how everything played out and the way that it also resolved, and has some really great set pieces that I thought were fantastic, especially in the Batmobile when it's revealed, and they have one of the best chase sequences in a Batman movie that I've seen in a while. Just everything about this movie was just so fantastic. I mean, I really have little to no flaws with this. I mean, there could have been some more things they maybe could have, like, you know, just little nitpicks that they could have spent more time on. Like, I thought Andy Serkis was great as Alfred. I thought he was a great, you know, giving him being the wisdom that we always know and love for Bruce, I thought was fantastic. But I just thought that he did kind of have a little bit of lack of screen time in certain scenes. And I think that they're going to probably do more with him down the line. But when he is on screen, I thought he was fantastic. And, you know, they could have maybe spent more time on just little other things to really showcase, like, you know, being able to, like, spend more time with him and Bruce together. And, you know, like I said, we could have gotten more Penguin, but those are just little minor nitpicks. But there maybe was a couple of points in the film as it went along that it wasn't really, like drainage for, it wasn't really a pacing problem, because I appreciate the fact the movie was 3 hours long and it really spent its time a lot. But there were points where it could have maybe just, you know, picked up just a little bit, because when it gets to the climax, it is fantastic, but it does feel like it was kind of like, okay, it's kind of there, you know, we have our big epic climax, and it kind of gets itself resolved a little bit quicker than expected. But again, those are just some minor, really minor kind of things that didn't hold the movie back at all for me. And so that being said, this is definitely going to be one of the best movies of 2022 for me, and definitely one of the best superhero movies I've seen from DC in quite a long time. And so with that, well, from Batman, one of the best Batman movies I've seen in a long time. And so with that, I'm going to give the movie a phenomenal grade on the Film Freaks meter. So for those of you who have also seen the Batman, let me know in the comments below what you thought about it. And thank you so much for watching. Stay safe, and I'll see you in my next review. I'll see you later.